So I think you didn't have to press a button saying you agreed to the recording.
I did.
You did?
I did.
Okay, and Anurupa did too. Okay,
Yeah.
so maybe I'll start. Well, you've all just seen Anurupa Roy's film about Ram. And now for the next half hour or so, we are privileged to be in discussion with Anurupa Roy, currently in New Delhi, and with Professor Paula Richman, who I believe might be in Ohio.
No, I'm in Massachusetts.
Oh, great. Even better. That's where I am.
Great.
Because of the time zone differences, those of you watching this will have just seen the film about Ram, but we're recording this in the morning. Because of time zone differences. So Anurupa Roy won't be able to join us in any discussion live, but we encourage you to discuss with each other in the chat column of the Zoom webinar any thoughts you have, and Paula and I will be live and able to respond. I think that's clear in my head. We'll see. So let me introduce our amazing guests. Anurupa Roy is a puppeteer, puppet designer, and director of puppet theater, and she views puppetry as an amalgam of plastic and performing arts, where sculptures, masks, figures, materials, found objects, and narratives come together with music, movement, physicality, and theater to create performances where humans and puppets are co-actors. Very exciting. She started a group, Katkatha, in 1998, and that was registered as Katkatha Puppet Arts Trust in 2006. Anurupa has directed over 15 shows for children and adults, ranging from the Ramayana and the Mahabharata to Shakespearean comedy, and to the Humayun Nama, which I realized, found out is Gulbadan Begum's 16th century account of the life of her half-brother, the Emperor Humayun. Very amazing. The puppets used by Anurupa's group range from 3 inches to 40 feet, and the shows have toured across Europe, Japan, and South Asia. A major aspect of this work is using puppets for psychosocial interventions in conflict areas like Kashmir, Sri Lanka, and Manipur, and to juvenile remand homes. She has worked with youth and women across the country of India using puppets to raise awareness about HIV/AIDS and gender issues. And she has been a visiting faculty member at UCLA in the States and artist in residence at the Pro Helvetia Swiss Arts Council. Welcome, Anurupa Roy. Paula Richman is the William Danforth Professor of South Asian Religions in the Department of Religion Emerita at Oberlin College, and has published widely in the fields of Ramayana studies and Tamil literature, or Tamil literature. I'm having a challenge pronouncing this morning. Collaborative projects she has directed culminated in 4 collections of multi-authored articles: Many Ramayanas, The Diversity of a Narrative Tradition in South Asia, Questioning Ramayanas, A South Asian Tradition, and Ramayana Stories in Modern South India, and her co-edited volume, Performing the Ramayana Tradition, Enactments, Interpretations, and Arguments, is forthcoming. Dr. Richman recently completed a monograph on Tamil retellings of Rama's story in Madras from 1918 to 1973. She's taught upper-level research seminars on the Ramayana tradition for more than 25 years, won the Oberlin College Teaching Award in the Humanities, and has received multiple fellowships, including a John Simon Guggenheim Memorial Fellowship, 2 National Endowment for the Humanities grants, and 3 American Institute of Indian Studies fellowships. So this is, I'm very excited about this discussion, and I thought we would just turn to Professor Richman.
Thank you. I just want to thank both of you. This is a rare opportunity. It's not easy for us to be in discussion with people across continents in today's divided world. I really want to thank you for arranging to have this discussion with us. Anurupa, I think I want to start with the question, what was the most challenging part of creating a puppet performance drawn from the Ramayana tradition, especially because in some ways it's a very long narrative, but you wanted to have it be less than an hour, which is wonderful because we can show it in classes. So I want to thank you for that.
Like you said, it's a very big narrative. Actually, even before I begin, I should tell you, one of the first things we read were your essays when we started researching the Ramayana. Because for me, approaching the Ramayana as a young person, I was quite young back then. It was 2004 when we started working with the Ramayana, was this real mishmash of having seen the Balinese Ramayana, and some of the traditional Indian Ramayana shows in leather shadow puppetry and string puppets and all the various puppet forms, because they all use the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. And then having read your essays, was almost this moment of building the bridge between how does a contemporary Indian artist start talking about an epic which is very strong in the public memory. You know, it like we say, cricket, politics, and the epics is something every Indian has an opinion about. So you can never get it right. So that was the first big critical challenge. The other was to really do justice to all the narratives, all the versions. Because if you look at the narrative, it's compared to the Mahabharata, quite a linear narrative in that respect. Yeah. But once you start looking at just the diversity within the narrative, between the, you know, the Bodhisattva narrative to the Tamil narrative to the puppeteers in Karnataka and the puppeteers in Orissa telling you completely different stories. In one, Hanuman is the hero, and another, Ram is the hero. And so for us, the absolutely critical aspect was to pay homage to the diversity, and especially in the performed forms of the Ramayana, not just the oral narrated versions. And in the performed forms, one of the key things we discovered, which basically brought everything together, is that the narrative informs form. So everything that you see visually, the aesthetic, the color, the type of puppet, the way it's drawn or painted or dressed, comes from the narrative itself. So we sort of took for granted that people knew the story, and then played with the various aspects that stay in the audience's memory, because we were talking about a very big subcontinent, not just India, but Cambodia, Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, all of them have the Ramayana. Within India, as you've mentioned, and as many scholars have, there are at least 300 oral narratives, and maybe even many, many more. And if you travel every 100 kilometers in India, something will change even within that linguistic. So how do you sort of do justice to this? That really was a very big challenge. So we kept the skeletal narrative, and we focused on the character of Ram as the protagonist, who is possibly recalling the entire epic and everything that happened to him, or possibly living through it in real time. And yes, I mean, overcame some of the challenges, but not all of them. Yes.
Just a quick comment on that. In Kudiyattam performances, the person who plays Ram, before the performance, he's supposed to recall and think about all the events in Rama's life. And it seems like there's a similar process for you in this piece.
Yes, also because the version we followed, Kirti Vasa's Ramayana, starts from the point where Ram, Sita and Lakshman have returned to Ayodhya, and Lakshman commissions a scroll painter to paint everything that has happened in the 14 years that they have been away.
Wow.
And I think this is a recurring theme in the Ramayana, that's going back and forth.
Fourth, yeah.
Yes, because even in the Adbhut Ramayans, you constantly hear about Hanuman reminiscing, and then Ram reminiscing or Sita reminiscing. The leather shadow puppet versions have this thing of Sita once reminiscing and then drawing the toe of Ravan.
Yes, right. Yeah. It's a
Because
wonderful story.
it's a wonderful story. So I think those, it's sort of inbuilt in this narrative, which we found very exciting, and we retained that in the performance.
Great. My next question sort of follows on this previous one. Why did you end up highlighting certain episodes rather than others? And I have to say that every single telling or performance of the story that I've ever heard does emphasize certain episodes, not everything equally. So I'm sure you had choices in mind. And what made you pick those particular incidents?
I think for us, we were looking at the story as almost a tragic love story of a hero who makes choices, very human choices, and there are consequences, and the immediate consequences that he's left alone forever. And I think we picked episodes which would highlight these choices specifically, and also again keeping true to this aspect of everything being scraps of memories in Ram's head. So you don't really see fully formed elements like the demons or the monkeys or the other characters who come into his life are sort of images that are projected. And except for Sita, who he sees very clearly twice when he makes the choice, and the puppeteers who are with him constantly and sort of are extensions of him. Sometimes they speak to him, sometimes they become the landscape that he uses to climb on or relive a memory.
Right.
And Hanuman, of course, who here in this case is almost an extension of him. We chose those very carefully as if we put ourselves in his shoes, what would stand out in this man's memory years later when he was contemplating and looking back.
Wonderful. I just thought of one thing I wanted to tell you. In the scene where you have all the images of the weapons are so interesting. Like there's the snake weapon there and all. Where did that come from? So all of these come from the Andhra traditional leather shadow puppet form called Tolu Bombalatam. We worked very closely with S. Chidambara Rao, who's he's master. He's a master who's been doing this generationally. And the animator on the project, Vishal Kedhar, they basically sat together and would look at composite images and puppets and take them apart. I mean, I walked into one of their discussions where they were building the Pushpak Viman, where the one on which Hanuman, Ravan captures Sita, but they were building jet propellers into them. So they were very often building things in and taking things out. So with the demons, one day they would so all the puppets were built and scanned and then animated in Maya. And one of the things that enabled the two of them to do together is things like shave off the hair of the demons, give them, spikes, or take away the weapons and look at them individually, and look at the weapons, because the weapons are very particular. Yes. In the narratives. The gods would carry a certain kind of demons, the demons. The animals would carry certain kind of weapons, and they change from narrative to narrative. And so we literally went with a scanner looking at the leather shadow puppets and worked with the puppeteer to sort of pull those out. And what was fantastic is this particular puppeteer, S. Chidambara Rao,
kept inventing new things. You know, he
Oh,
wanted some of them to turn into machine guns, and he wanted to look at this narrative of war as something very contemporary.
yes.
So it was very exciting collaborating with the traditional puppet master.
I think that was one of the most surprising and exciting parts, just visually. I recognize some of the weapons, you know, and I'm not a weapons person, but I recognize some of them. And I just thought, this is so marvelous because, for one thing, you're not glorifying violence by having human beings killing each other, but you're using those weapons as images, and I almost had the feeling that the weapons were like clusters of thoughts, you know, the way you've done it. Now I understand why, and I'm amazed at at all the work that went into it. It's an amazing part of the play. Now I was very intrigued with what you did with music, or more largely the soundscapes, because some of the sounds were very abstract. Some came from like dance traditions and everything. But when I was first looking at it, I realized it was one of the few puppet performances that I've seen where there weren't actual lyrics. So tell us a little bit about how you conceptualize that.
Music for us was really the language of the show, because the text was very dangerous because the minute you go into text, you start identifying the Ramayana with a region or a version. And we stayed with music because it enabled many people to read many things into it. We've performed it across the country, and no matter where you go, everybody finds something that they relate to as their version. And I think it's the music that enables it. We've performed it in Chennai, and people immediately recognized, the ghatam, the chenda. In Kerala, it was very similar. In Kolkata, in West Bengal, it was very similar. And I think the reason was, like in the animation, we had a very talented animator collaborator. Our music composer, he's really was very well versed in world music, also in the various Indian music traditions, both the Carnatic classical as well as the Hindustani classical. He came from a percussion background itself, which is why the music is so percussion heavy. But what he did really well is used percussion as language, because you can hear him use the tabla bowl as a vocal form instead of using words. And he did that with the Ketchak music as well, because if, the point where Hanuman's swimming is completely from the Balinese Ketchak. So he had the Malay Gamelan, the Balinese Ketchak, the Ghatam, the Mridangam, the Sarangi, and the music instruments are also really strongly associated with the traditional narratives and the diverse traditional narratives. If you think of the leather shadow puppet form of Kerala, you immediately think of the Chenda. And if you think of the leather shadow puppet form of Rajasthan, I mean the puppet form of Rajasthan, you'll immediately think of the Sarangi. So it was also that he was using almost clues for the audience to think of their local versions. And I think that helped us overcome this big challenge of a very diverse, very multi-lingual narrative, multifaceted narrative. Yes.
I wanted to say that what intrigued me and what seemed really masterful was the fact that the music, while hitting certain kinds of notes and sounds that would enable people to connect, it did not do the kind of bland, oh, we'll just put something for everything, for everyone in here. The musical soundscape was so elegantly focused it was a kind of a minimalist music, and yet it seemed to really infuse the puppetry in the way that you've set it up. And I thought that that was a very challenging thing to do.
Yes, I think our music composer his challenge was huge. It's the first time he was composing for puppets.
Oh,
And also he had to look at this language of the epic. And I think he's enormously skilled.
mm.
And he stayed with us through a lot of the rehearsals.
Oh,
He was really involved in the process. And we were sending him a lot of video recordings from time to time, because
oh,
it took us about a year to improvise the show, because it was all first improvised and
mm,
then was also being co-written in a way,
mm,
and was mostly sketched instead of being written. And
mm.
also the animator and the musician were present in many of the rehearsals. So that really, really helped. And I think Abhijit's sort of knowledge of all these different types of music really helped the performance, really helped us as puppeteers, because if he had given us very strictly classical music, it would
Yeah,
have been very difficult for the puppeteers to have translated it to movement.
yeah. And also, if it was strictly classical, I feel like it would have excluded certain people, and yet it didn't. I mean,
Yes.
I felt like everybody heard certain sonic echoes which enabled them to enter. Um, I I don't know if this is something that you could do easily, but if, people are always asking me, what's the takeaway from what you've done? Were there one or two insights that you really hoped that the viewers, who many of whom would already know the core story, that they would take away from the performance?
I think our one key motive was that the audience realizes that everybody has their favorite version of the epic,
Mhm,
but it is just a version, because there
mhm,
are many, many versions. And what is really powerful about the epic is that everybody owns it,
mhm,
and it's still alive.
mhm,
It's still living in the idioms and the sayings and of everyday people. And the fact that it traveled so
mhm,
far and wide is something that we really wanted people to take away. That uh, whether it's performed, whether it's narrated, whether it's in a book, whether it's televised, uh, that which you're watching in that moment is only one version
mhm,
and only one rendition. And the
mhm.
next night, the same performer would say it in a different way,
Right,
perform it in a different way.
right.
And this was very critical for us to convey.
Um, do you, how do you get feedback from your audience? Do people ever stay around and talk to the performers afterwards and say, I heard this happened in this incident? Do you ever get that kind of feedback?
We actually, About Ram is a show where we open the stage for audiences to come and actually meet the puppets,
Oh, that's
which has
great.
always been very exciting.
Sure.
Visual is he has Ram on this throne, and he's all alone. And the really interesting thing that happens is everybody wants to meet Ravan.
Oh,
Everybody wants to see him.
mm,
So they see Ram and they sort of stand around and watch him
mm,
for a little bit, but they really want to see the demons. They want to see the demon mask,
uh-huh,
and they want to meet Sita. So that is, and Hanuman.
uh,
Especially children want to see the demons. They want to see the backstage area. They want to know where the monkey went, what happened to him, and that's always one feedback. And the other is exactly like you said. They ask us And so what happened in the end, because the most popular televised version in the 90s does not end with Ram sitting alone.
Right.
It's hinted
Right.
at, but you don't see this very tragic ending.
Yes.
And a lot of people said, but is that how it ended? Did he have nobody
Yes.
with him?
Mm.
And that's always something that people seem to be unaware of. In fact, we often talk about, we haven't shown it, is also the way he dies. Is something
Mm.
that people very commonly don't know about, how
Mhm.
he finally walks into the Sarayu River.
Right.
And so these are very interesting for us
Mhm.
as performers,
Mhm.
that people very often don't know these versions or these aspects of
Right.
even very, very
Right.
mainstream versions of the Ramayana. And these are very, very big questions that are always asked.
So
And as
the
you,
performance just, it sounds like the performance becomes an introduction to
yes,
people's generating new questions about the narrative.
yes, absolutely.
I've been thinking about this. You know, some of the most popular visual images are of the coronation. And if you think about that, everybody's in the picture, Sita and Lakshman and Hanuman. And you don't see a lot of visual images, for example, of Sita bringing up the twin sons in the forest. I have a few, but that's just not as popular in the visual tradition. I was also thinking that when you end with Rama on the throne, it reminds me of some actual modern contemplations of Rama at the end of his life, where he really, you know, he refuses to remarry. He will not remarry because he is a one-wife man, unlike his father, and he refuses to marry. And it struck me in your performance, you see that the tragedy of the couple is the fact that he has that pressure from the people in his kingdom to send Sita away. And we know that Sita suffered, but we also see in your performance that Ram suffered too and longed to be reunited with her, which is a big theme in Indian literature, the lovers separated and reunited. And in some plays, mainly I'm thinking of Bhavabhuti's play, they are actually reunited at the end. And people don't necessarily know that, so I make it a point to tell them that there is a story in which that happens. And I was thinking in terms of you, they end up getting reunited when Rama watches a performance of his story in which Sita is acting Sita. What a fantastic reference to performance and the power of performance.
Yes, absolutely.
Let's see, I had a couple of other questions. How are we doing time-wise, John?
I think there's time for a couple of more questions.
Okay, and Anurupa, just feel free to talk about these briefly if you want. How different is your use of puppets in About Ram from the other puppet performance you've created? It sounds to me like you did so much training of the puppeteers specifically for this performance. I'd love to hear more about that.
About Ram was really a turning point for us, because before About Ram, I think we were searching for a language for modern Indian puppet theater. So we have this vast tradition, and then we have this very short contemporary puppet history, if you can call it that. And there, as a company, we were just finding our feet. We started in 1998 and we registered in 2006. And in our early productions, we were using a lot of these tabletop, bunraku inspired multiple puppeteer puppets. But there was always the question of what is the language of the body of the puppet? What does the anatomy, how does the anatomy move? What is the grammar? And in the initial years, we were using a lot of realism. Of course, we were using a lot of what I would say is almost animation, digital animation like language. And then with About Ram, by then the company had two dancers. Both of them were trained in Mayurbhanj Chau. And we had collaborated with a couple of classical dancers. And it increasingly felt like we needed to have our own language for a contemporary Indian puppet theater company. And we started to study dance more and more. And the classical dances like Bharatnatyam, which are so, finger and face specific, weren't the answer. And we were looking at lines in the body. And it was the martial dances like Chau and more recently Kalaripayattu, which we use more and more now, which seem to have an answer for a grammar of movement for the puppet. And we took this very, very stylized approach because the entire About Ram performance has very little realism. It's very stylized. The fight sequences where you see the Ram puppet actually uses exact compositions from Mayurbhanj Chau. The warriors would dance like that. If you see, our Ram doesn't use a bow and arrow, he uses a sword.
Yeah.
And this is also because in Mayurbhanj, you will see most of the epic heroes use swords. So a lot of these were done very self-consciously, and we trained for almost a year, and we worked 365 days that year. That was a very significant year for us. It was a no-break year. Just working and training our body around the clock, working with the dance trainer and working with the martial artist, and then working with the puppet. And what we discovered along the way is the beginning of a language, which we have used for all of these years after About Ram. Also, it's become a way in which we train newer puppeteers to move the puppet, to understand the anatomy of the puppet. So yes, it was very, very significant. And the narrative informed the form. So I think it's while working with the Ramayana that we sort of started looking at Chau and Kalaripayattu as ways of moving the puppet. So,
wow. So in not just the narrative sense, but in the actual puppetry grammar, this Ramayana project enabled you to enrich your future projects.
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
Well, this is fascinating. I think I'll end there and turn it over to John.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks so much, Paula. I think we've come to the end of our allotted time, but this has been an amazing discussion. And I really learned a lot in this short time of your work, Anurupa, is so amazing and rich. And I really appreciate Paula's understanding of the Ramayana traditions that you're connecting with. It's so nice to see this epic tradition of puppetry being so robust and so innovative, thinking of what you've done with About Ram. So we've come to the end of this session, and I want to thank Joanne Cavallo from Columbia University for pulling this all together, World Epics in Puppetry, and to thank you, Paula, and to thank you, Anurupa. So I guess we'll say goodbye and we'll stop recording, and thanks everybody in the audience for watching this and supporting World Epics in Puppetry. So thank you
Can
all. Yes,
Can I just say
Paula.
one thing? Thank you, John. You are a
You, yes.
major person who cares deeply about puppetry.
That's right.
And I read your book this weekend about American puppet modernism. And I think you and Anurupa have so many interesting shared interests.
Oh, well, we'll have to talk more then.
Okay,
Let's
sounds
do that.
good.
Okay. Thanks
Bye-bye.
everybody for watching. Thank you, thank you,
Thank
thank
you.
you.
Bye.